So welcome to what I like to call Devil's Tower Mini or Devil's Tower Light. This is going to be a prime example of something called hexagonal or columnar jointing. So columnar jointing is going to be where you have different parts of a magmatic body cooling at different rates. So when this occurs, you will start to have contraction of some areas that are cooling a little bit ahead of others. So of course, then you'll have some of that globular type of things. Think of like a scab. More of that lava kind of globbing around the cooler areas. And eventually you'll start to have these areas contracting a little bit. So if you think of mud does the same thing. In drier conditions, you will have the mud fracture in six-sided, sometimes five-sided types of formations. It's just Mother Nature's kind of way to make everything contract while having the same amount of material. So it's kind of like a pencil box. Pencils are six-sided for a reason. Pencils are going to be able to fit more in a box if they are going to be six-sided. So this is basically Mother Nature's very smart. Between the trees, the geologic processes. But this, obviously, you don't see any volcanoes in this area right now, do you? I haven't seen one. Well, this is not from any time recently. This was going to erupt out of the Earth's surface about 740 million years ago. So the very first mountain building event that we had here at Shenandoah was going to be about 1.2 billion years ago. That was going to be called the Grenville orogeny. So anything that is going to have that prefix oro is going to typically be the prefix meaning pertaining to mountains. So if you think about orographic lift, what causes the mountain weather that we experience with higher amounts of precipitation and snowfall. Whenever anything is influenced by mountains or created into mountains, it will be oro something typically. So this would have been part of an orogeny that we had back about 1.2 billion years ago. So then when you had the whole supercontinent of Rodinia all together, and you had those continents starting to try to break up, great amounts of heat were building up underneath that thick continental crust with very large mountains along the whole perimeter of that whole continent. So when it started to break up a little bit, something had to replace on the surface that land. So great rifts were occurring and a lot of erupted lava started pouring out. And it's really kind of still happening in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Very similar processes developed to spread the Atlantic Ocean. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So of course, this was going to pour out about 740 million years ago. You were going to have about 1,800 feet of basaltic lavas erupt onto the surface, cool. And then you had the Iapetus Ocean open. Iapetus is going to be the father of Atlas, who the Atlantic Ocean was named after. So what we have here is kind of a constant cycle where the continents drift back together, then pull back apart when too much heat builds under the supercontinent, which pulls it apart like taffy again. And then eventually the seafloor becomes too dense, starts to sink down below that continental crust and slip down and start to create subduction, which will eventually cause the slab to pull, and eventually the ocean starts to close again. So the mountains we're standing on now are kind of what I like to call the perpetual mountains of Virginia. They have been created no fewer than 4 times. We've had the Grenville orogeny, then we had the Taconic orogeny, the Acadian orogeny, and what you're standing on right now are the remnants of the Alleghenian orogeny 300 million years ago. So another thing to think about, are these rocks, even from here, if they're on the mountain. So there are going to be several different ways you can do what's called crustal shortening. Crustal shortening can occur when you have that subduction of one slab going below another. And so you end up with, like Japan, the trenches off of Japan. You have all of that crust slipping below to shorten the crust there. Or you can have mountains building and propping up. So in these folded mountains throughout most of the Appalachians, you will have more shortening. So this is not from here. We did not have volcanic activity in the Appalachians, at least during the last mountain building event, at least in the Blue Ridge, I should say. This is from 75 miles to our east. So once again, of course, these rocks were 740 million years old. They erupted right where the breakup was occurring between the supercontinents. So all of that lava was deposited horizontally. But as you can tell from the tilt, it's no longer horizontal. So of course, when you had Africa and Eurasia collide back together in the closing of this ocean, you had all of those rocks from 75 miles east get thrust up. And the entire area of these greenstone rocks or basaltic rocks here are going to act like a snowplow and crumple up the other mountains that you see off to our west. So the mountains off to our west are going to be the sea floor of the ancient Iapetus Ocean. You can see a couple of fossils here in the park from that. One of them is the only one really is going to be the Scolithos. It is going to be a worm tube fossil from the beach sands and shallow environments of the ocean at one point. So all of that got crumpled up on the west side. When you're driving down Skyline Drive, especially in the southern part of the park, you're going to be going back and forth between beach sands and volcanic rocks. I encourage everybody to go down to mile marker about 78, take a good look at the Rocky Top overlook, go to the other side of the road and check out the Loft Mountain overlook or Ivy Creek overlook. When you're looking east, you're looking at the volcanic rocks. They look much different. They're large domes. When you look to the west, everything is very sharp and jagged. So there's a reason why in the southern part of the park there are so many areas called Rocky Top, Rocky Mountain, Rocky Mount. They didn't just run out of names. It's because that's the best way to describe some of that area. So it just erodes in a much different way. It tends to erode a lot quicker. This right here does not erode very easily. This is very, very hard rock. So originally this was going to be erupted as basalt. Basalt is black. Why is this stone somewhat greenish? Well, it's because it's not 100% basalt anymore. So basalt wouldn't be this color right here. This is a really good example if anybody wants to take a look at that freshly broken area. Is that greenish blue? So what you're looking at right down here is going to be an extra mineral that was pushed into these rocks during the last continental collision called epidote. Epidote is a silicate material that will sink into the rocks and kind of be forced in, and eventually you had it kind of partial melt along with getting some of this epidote included inside, and so the rock became even harder. So this rock is now about a 7.5 on Mohs scale of hardness. If you remember from your high school geology, dig out those memories. A 1 is going to be talc, and it's going to be a scale that mostly is going to rate minerals. So 1 would be talc, a 10 would be a diamond. So 7.5 is pretty hard. It does not weather very easily at all. So most of this park is going to be this type of rock. That is one reason that these mountains are higher than most of the other mountains around us, because they are much more resistant to the erosion. It is one of the reasons we have so many waterfalls in our park. We have 55 different waterfalls throughout the park. All of these types of these lava flows you don't really have any way through the rock. Everything has to flow off of this magmatic province and down. So where you have different rock types kind of colliding with each other, maybe you have this really hard resistant greenstone like right here, and it falls onto a weaker rock. Let's say quartzite, sandstone, even granite, believe it or not. And that'll start to dig into that, and so that'll be a nick point. It'll fall a little bit more, erode a little bit faster, and eventually it becomes what you have here down at White Oak Canyon, where you have about 2,500 feet of different drops of waterfalls through that area. So definitely a geologic spectacle to see. If you go to a place like Little Devil Stairs or Big Devil Stairs, you can see each of our 6 lava flows throughout the entire canyon, which is absolutely amazing that those are still intact today. Stony Man, the reason why Stony Man was given the name Stony Man is because of all those lava flows, you started having a bit of a face develop. If you get really, really kind of imaginative, you can see a nose, a forehead, a mouth, a chin, a beard, and so that is why Stony Man got his name. So volcanics may not be here today, but they were going to make up our park. Just one of the many things that, many twists geology can throw at you. So to get the best view or best look at this area back here, I will ask everybody to please be careful, but this is going to be the best way to see those hexagonal shapes in the rock. I will go ahead and point it out over here. If anybody wants to come over, just please be careful on these rocks.
Oh, okay.
Hi there. Yes.
I found mushrooms near that phone.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Does that mean it's a pretty wet environment here?
Yeah.
It absolutely does. So you can really see these 6-sided shapes right here, right near there.
What happened?
So this might be amazing, but if anybody wants to take another trip within the park boundaries, there's an even better example of this columnar jointing. That is going to be up in the Compton Peak area. The Compton Peak area has the best example of columnar jointing along the entire East Coast. That is about a 1.4 mile long hike round trip.
Wow.
You do gain about 860 feet of elevation along that journey, but it is totally worth it when you get to see these amazing spectacles of geology and nature. So we'll go ahead and come back over here, and I'll go ahead and conclude the program. I've definitely gone over time. You all have been very patient with me.
This has been great. I ask you to review one question for me again.
Yes.
Could you give me your name and geologic credentials?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Ranger Kyle Olson. I went to Old Dominion University and got a degree in geology back in 2010.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.